Following program is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not to be considered legal advice. Fraudsters Radio was created to expose the many scams and frauds that have so infected society today. Scammers, fraudsters, and rip-off artists abound, whether it's scamming homeowners with bogus foreclosure relief services, dating fraud, incompetent lawyers, or consumer rip-offs. It's high time the public has a voice. If you work in a profession that deals with fraud, or if you believe you were or are a victim of fraud, you now have a radio listening public that wants to hear from you. Please feel free to message us through our Fraudsters Radio Facebook page, and we may have you on the show as a guest. If you'd like to call in for today's show, the number is 646-668-8512.
And thanks for joining us today. This is Laurie Z, your co-host, and with me today is my co-host, Storm Bradford. Say hi, Storm. How are you doing today?
How are you, Laurie?
I'm doing well. We've got back with us actually an IRS Public Affairs person, Raphael Tulino. Raphael, welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, Storm, I know you're anxious to discuss some things that we didn't cover with the IRS last time, so why don't you start?
Well, and this is what we'd like to discuss today is the fact that there's a lot, and there's actually millions, as far as we can tell, that believe that the only people that have to pay income taxes are residents of Washington, D.C. So if we could start off by maybe addressing that, it would be helpful for a lot of our listeners to understand what it says.
Yeah, no worries. So there are a lot of frivolous tax arguments, such as perhaps what you described there, that a lot of folks adhere to or subscribe to, if you will. And they are, how do you describe, maybe just misinterpretations of the law. But the bottom line is that we all have an obligation to pay the taxes we owe if we have a requirement to do so per what the law says. And I guess we should take care of business as such. But we have a nice pamphlet we've had online at irs.gov, and it's called The Truth About Frivolous Tax Arguments. And it'll present an argument such as what you mentioned, and then it'll present the truth and court cases and this, that, and the other as such. But, if you're going to go down the road and subscribe to those, be careful. There's a lot of bumps in that road. It would be advisable that you don't. I understand people do, and they believe that, but I would say that's not the action and not the road to take.
So let me ask you, what's the psychology? Do people just want to believe that they don't have to pay taxes, and that's why they kind of fall for that scam? They just want to believe, hey, I don't have to pay it?
The psychology of it could be something like that. Like they are sold some goods that would have them believe that this is the real deal and this is that. But in reality, it's not. I don't think there really is any silver bullet, if you will, or whatever term I can to offer that says, oh, here's how you can absolve yourself of paying taxes if you have a requirement to pay them. In reality, a lot of folks legally do not have a legal requirement to file a tax return and pay taxes. For example, if you're a senior citizen, your only income is from Social Security, chances are you have no tax consequences, if you will, and don't have to necessarily file a return. But going back to what I was saying, certainly a lot of folks do see that, and perhaps they think that is the truth, but in reality, for the most part, it's not. And it would be advisable to just be careful if you're going to consider that kind of a path.
Yeah, no, I have Storm.
What I was going to say is that it's like anything else. People should get a second opinion. They should go to a CPA. They should go to a tax attorney. Because if the Criminal Investigation Division comes knocking on your door, they're going to question you regarding your failure to file tax returns, or you've filed frivolous returns, or whatever the case may be, and there's instructions that the courts give, and they're called willful blindness instructions, where if you went and listened to some guru, some alleged guru that is selling you this nonsense, this willful blindness instruction will be given to the jury that will convict you because you weren't paying taxes, because you didn't go get a second opinion. You didn't check it out. You didn't go to the IRS website. Any comments on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I understand that. I get that. That's a good point. Certainly, if you think you have an obligation to file a return and take care of your business, definitely going to a CPA or a tax professional is a good idea. A lot of folks do. In fact, the number over the years is about 55 to 60% of all returns filed are done from tax professionals. But if you feel like somebody's telling you something that may be too good to be true, and before you take that advice, step into somebody who knows what they're talking about and can put you on the right road, if you will. It's tempting, right, to believe that, hey, I don't have to take care of business the way everybody else does, but the chances are that's not the right deal.
Are there a lot of lawsuits, where the IRS gets involved because people just believe they don't have to pay?
Right. Well, court cases, right? So court cases where, willful tax evasion is taking place because some belief or misbelief of this, that, and the other, and there's so many of those. And as I mentioned before, we have a little bit of a PDF document on irs.gov that has the truth about those, and there's many arguments that are laid out. And then the truth is laid out, and there's court cases to support it. That says a court ruled in favor of the IRS because the taxpayer, took a bogus belief or a misinterpretation and took it too far, and therefore decided they weren't going to pay the obligations they were supposed to pay. And like I say, you want to be careful there. You really want to be careful.
Do you have any statistics on how many people get prosecuted for these different violations of the tax laws?
You mean in the frivolous arena, as we're discussing? I really don't off the top, but every once in a while, you have a criminal investigation division, and they have lots of enforcement resources, and they go out and do what they do for willful evasion for other reasons besides frivolous, in terms of not paying taxes for other reasons. But off the top, I don't have statistics, but I do know that that does happen, and we do what we can to try to shut them down and have them take care of business as they're supposed to, which is paying the tax.
Now, how do you get tipped off? Yeah, let me just ask, how do you get tipped off to legal cases like this? Do people? Is there if someone knows that or suspects that somebody's doing something and not paying taxes, what should they do? Yeah,
we have complaint forms for tax professionals, complaint forms for these are third-party referrals, right, for individuals. So let's say you believe your neighbor is, doing bad things. There's a form for that. If you have a tax professional who you feel is shady, there's a form for that. So the bottom line is, you can definitely report somebody you feel is not taking care of business, but there really is no phone number for it. It's a form, and it's sent in, and the people who get those forms do nothing else but get them and evaluate them and see what's on that form, so we can look further. But and that's all on IRS.gov. There's also forms for improprieties for, an exempt organization, that kind of thing. There's a whole bunch of them. But the bottom line is, yes, if you feel and you want to use that, there's a third-party referral form, and we're glad to take them and take a look.
Okay. Let's get to this question. Excuse me. What should someone do that got caught up in this, believed it, and now listen to this program and say, oh, my goodness, I've screwed up here. I need to get this cleaned up. What can they do to try to clean up some mess they may have gotten themselves into?
Understood. They're proactive is better than reactive on that. So, if you feel that, well, man, I followed some bad advice here, I better take care of business, then you want to reach out and contact the agency or do what you need to do. Maybe reach out to a third-party CPA like you mentioned. Perhaps there are returns that need to be filed, and take care of business that way. It's much better to be more proactive than reactive, because at some point it may be worse down the road if you don't take any action. But if you're willing to step forward, if you will, to voluntarily. Those consequences are usually less penal, if you will, than if you don't. So, know what I mean? So, yeah, it's a good idea to do that, and that does happen as well. And we want to generally help people come back into compliance. So, if you're out of compliance, you haven't filed a return, you haven't paid for a while. The paddy wagon's not coming, but we'll help you. But you're going to probably have to pay some penalties and interest and face the music, if you will, for having been out of compliance for a while. And there are folks that are in that position, but we certainly want to be a help in that regard and not a hinder. So you get the idea.
And we found it. Excuse me. What we found over the years is that when you do come forward like that the service will not go after you to prosecute you if you basically go. And I think that's part of the fear that a lot of people have, is that if they haven't paid their taxes for whatever reason, well, oh no, I better not call them. Maybe they forgot about me, and I better not, in other words, shake the tiger. But
right,
it's been our experience that if you do come forward, that the chances of being prosecuted are virtually nil from that standpoint.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I would reiterate the same thing you just said by just saying, like I said before, we want to help you take care of business as opposed to not. And willful tax evasion and facts and circumstances around every individual case are different, right? So you have to take a look at all those. But generally speaking, yes, we want to help you take care of your business and not necessarily anything more. But the thing about that, as I say, there are penalties, there's interest, and there's some things that you let go for a while if you're in that situation, if you will, then you may have to pay. Now, that said, like I say, facts, circumstances, maybe we abate penalties for one reason or another, and that does happen all the time as well. But at the same time, you can't say it's cut and dry. You have to take a look at every case and consider all the facts and all the circumstances, and then you go from there.
What about, you see those commercials on TV saying, oh, we'll negotiate with the IRS for you, pay pennies on the dollar, that kind of thing. Are those companies legitimate, or again, is that sort of something to watch out for?
Well, we don't take a stance on that. That's a civil decision you make as a taxpayer with one of those representation firms, and no worries there. But a couple of things. One, if you have an obligation and you've been out of compliance and you want to take care of your business, you can come directly to the IRS and we'll work with you. Generally, you need to be in full disclosure of your finances, and that usually means past, present, and future. And the agency will work with you and take care of things. We do have that offer and compromise program that is used, and folks do qualify for. But if you do listen to some of the radio and TV ads and such, nobody can guarantee you anything until they really know your full set of circumstances and how much you owe and the whole deal around it. So you want to be careful with the thought process of thinking, oh, if I go to this company ABC with my situation, they're going to take 10 cents on the dollar. Well, that depends on the whole ball of wax you got going there in your personal unique situation. So you want to be careful before you take that general belief that they're going to take care of business for you without knowing everything. But the other side of the coin is, like I say, you can come directly to the agency, and perhaps the money or whatever the upfront costs you pay to that firm would be better spent just paying off the taxes the obligations you owe directly to IRS.
And do people think that they may think, hey, I'm going to jail, especially if you get people that maybe don't speak English well, and that's, I think, where the fear is like, oh, my gosh, how can I explain this to somebody? And so if they're in a bad situation and they call the IRS will work out some type of a payment plan with them, correct? But they're sitting there going, oh, my gosh, I may go to jail. That's the thought.
Well, if you have an obligation you can't full pay, then yeah, you can pay over time. We have plenty of flexibility there to make an installment agreement so you can pay. And we have opportunities, as a matter of fact, on IRS.gov where you can set it up automatically and just pay, monthly payments. But certainly, yeah, that feeds into scams where the phone call comes in and, hey, we're from the IRS and you need to pay this money or we're going to arrest you and do this, that, and the other. And that's been ongoing for the last several years and so many different variations and nuances. But we don't demand immediate tax payment. Certainly, we want to work with folks if you're in a position where you can't full pay, and there's lots of flexibility for us to do so. But the taxpayer needs to kind of work with us in terms of answering letters in the mail and contacting the agency and being upfront about their situation so we can take care of business together.
All right, very good. Well, let's do this. Let's go to a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk some more about tax fraud.
Have you received a notice of foreclosure on your property? Do you suspect that you're involved in an unfair or fraudulent loan agreement? Are you looking for a way to save your home? Would you like to cut through all the misinformation and find out what really works? Would you like to learn strategies that the so-called gurus aren't aware of? If you answered yes to any of those questions, a professional team at Mortgage Fraud Examiners can assist you and your attorney with all of these things and more. Contract breaches, errors, statutory regulatory violations, fraudulent appraisals, and other fraudulent conduct cause most mortgages to be legally problematic. In fact, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation found that nearly 2,000 financial institutions they assessed received citations for significant compliance violations. They also examined appraisals and found out that of the 259 appraisals reviewed for accuracy, only 7 fully complied with professional standards. Call us at 844-920-7200. That's 844-920-7200. Mortgage Fraud Examiners, 844-920-7200.
We're back on with AM FM 24/7 radio. We have a special guest today from the IRS, Mr. Trulino. Laurie, you want to ask a couple of questions you have on your list there?
Yeah, and I want to give out our call-in number in case anybody has any questions. You can call into 646-668-8512. Okay, a big one for me, because I'm a credit consultant, is identity theft. Now, in the last few years, there's been a problem with electronic returns. I know people that have not gotten their returns, their money back, because there was some type of identity theft, hacking, whatever you want to call it. What is happening now with that, and how does the IRS deal with that and those people that are maybe waiting for their their refunds, but they're not getting them?
Well, okay, so Laura, a couple things here. I'm not quite sure how you're referring to there. I'm not aware of any electronic filing breaches in terms of refunds going back to bank accounts and that kind of thing. What we do see, though, is identity theft up front, meaning somebody files a return in your name by getting your information or your information enough to file a fraudulent tax return on your behalf, and then your refund goes to the fraudster who filed that return on your behalf. And then when that happens, then we have lots of resources in place, to work with people. And unfortunately, it's been on the uptick for the last few years, but we are quite dedicated with the resources we have for prevention and detection, victim assistance and such. But going back to what you're saying, I'm not aware of any breaches of any e-filed return or any refunds going back to folks, other than the once in a while you hear about somebody who transposed a bank account or routing number, and then you got to kind of untangle that with your bank or your financial institution. But on the front side of things, the identity theft is certainly something we're dealing with, but we've been doing a really good job of using all the tools that we've developed over the last few years to cut that down quite dramatically. As the years go by, we're getting better in terms of what we're doing to prevent it from the bad money from going out the door to begin with. Now, that said, that does tend to delay some refunds, and so with about 3/4 of all taxpayers getting refunds and Treasury issuing about $110 million or some number every year, so that's just about 75%, a lot of folks get money coming back, and unfortunately there are some lengthy, more than lengthy 21 days is what I'm trying to say, more than 21 days that some folks run into because we are working behind the scenes to be sure that refund is going out to the legitimate taxpayer and not fraudulently. So there might be some delays there, and we ask people to understand that's a good thing, really, if you think about it, because we're trying to be the best stewards of tax money, if you will, and what we're doing behind the scenes is really doing a nice job of preventing a lot of it from going out the door to begin with.
Now, do you think at any time in the future that people might be given a number that's not a Social Security number, where everybody's number now is on the dark web and they buy them for $1 a piece? Is there any other way to connect people to the IRS? In other words, like some type of a personal assigned number that would just be for that particular person. But then again, I'm going to say probably anything can be breached,
It's already happening. It's called an IP PIN, and there's a pilot. There's 3 states. I think it's D.C., Florida, and Georgia. No, D.C., Florida, and off the top, I think it's Georgia. Perhaps I'm wrong, but where it's a pilot program where you can get an IP PIN, and it's a separate number just for federal tax purposes. But what happens is if you feel you become a victim of or you have become a victim of identity theft, you get that number sent to you every year, and then you use that number on your return when you file a tax return. So that's happening as well. We have other tools as well. There are letters that will be sent to you if we feel that perhaps there might be fraudulent activity in your account. We will want to verify that we're working with you and you are you, so to speak, before you get your refund. So that delays things sometimes, unfortunately. There are verification codes and W-2s that are being used now. So there's all kinds of tools we have in place. But certainly we do ask patience and understanding that we're doing the best we can, and if you become entangled in it, we're working really hard to minimize the wait time, but it can take somewhere between 100 and 150 days to kind of get through things if you happen to be in that position where somebody filed a return on your behalf and your account was frozen and all that. But at the same time, we're doing what we can on the prevention side as well.
So before Storm jumps in and asks a question, I'm going to tell you I am a victim of identity theft. So, for example, all my information to the state of Florida as a registered voter, they publish on the web my name, my address, and my date of birth. And I know that I'm on the dark web, so it's very easy. So, of course, I have a security freeze on mine. But I think someone like me would be a good candidate for that type of a program because my credit cards automatically change twice a year because at this point they already know that it's not me. How do you get involved if you're in Florida or one of these states with that program?
Oh, just go to irs.gov, then keyword search IP PIN. IPPIN, and you can read about the program and what it does and how it works and all that. But like I say, I believe that pilot is still in place for those 3 states, and you can read about it more on irs.gov. But like you say, and as I mentioned, it's one of our resources we're using to try to cut down and combat, if you will, the bad guys.
Wanted to get back for a moment to possibly address some of the terms that are used in the Internal Revenue Code. I know on your website that you have you've put in court cases that define these, but as a rule, the courts have all found arguments such as I'm not a citizen, I'm not a person within the code, includes is a definition of enlargement instead of limitation. All of those things are there on your website. So it would behoove anyone to go to that website, look it over, and get that, because that's a second opinion. I mean, if somebody wants a second opinion, they can go to that website and find the answers to this and don't even necessarily have to go to a tax attorney or go to a CPA to get these answers.
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. Yeah, IRS.gov is a good spot. There's lots of information there, and certainly what you're saying is true. We have all kinds of information if you need some guidance, if you will, on something. But I think what you're saying really goes back to, I think, some common sense there. If something sounds like it's too good to be true, perhaps it is. So you want to look into it before you perhaps decide to follow or heed any sort of advice like that. That's what I would just say off the top. For example, if somebody is telling you, this doesn't apply to you and you don't have to pay these taxes, I know how to do this, that, and the other, you might want to really do some research there before you believe it. But I can tell you there really is nothing out there that's going to, put you in that position. It's just, you just want to be careful.
Well, what we've found over the years is a lot of these so-called gurus who are out there propagating this nonsense actually file tax returns. But what they do is they sell these programs to these unsuspecting dupes of theirs to try out their, quote, legal theories. They tell them, well, go ahead and do this, and if you don't hear from the IRS again, that means that the argument is correct. Well, nothing can be further from the truth, because I've been a litigation support company for almost 40 years dealing in criminal defense and things of that nature, and I know that the federal government wants to make damn sure that they have a case before they come forward to prosecute. And so what they do is they take their time to do the investigation that needs to be done before they come after one of these people. Any comments on that?
No, but it sounds like what you're saying is logical and correct. If you have an obligation and you are willfully evading taxes in some way, shape, or form, at some point, you might get that contact. And if you do, you want to do your best you can to follow along. And like I said before, if you are in that position before you get to that point, if you're proactive, definitely the consequences are a little better for you than if you wait until the IRS comes knock on your door, if you will. I mean, so to speak, to have you take care of business. So yeah, that's a good point, what you said.
Now, actually, there's no place for someone to actually call, is there? Because I know a lot of these people that call the IRS up and they have these ridiculous, frivolous arguments, and they want to, whoever they're talking to on the phone, basically just hangs up on them, because I'm sure the IRS doesn't want to waste their time with a bunch of crackpots that are coming up with these arguments. So as a rule, is there not a place that they can call to speak with somebody regarding what they believe to be true?
Well, the national toll-free number that millions of people call is the number to reach somebody at IRS. But to be quite honest, if you get one of our telephone assisters on the call after they ask you a whole bunch of security questions, what normally happens is people want to know about their account, I owe this much money, or where's my refund, or all these different other questions. But I suppose that person can tell you, don't take that advice and this, that, and the other. But I think the other part of what you said and your advice is to go online and do that. So irs.gov, it's irs.gov, that's the spot where you want to go or just anywhere on the internet, really. Not to say that going to other places on the internet is going to get you other things, because there's false positives, as you were suggesting. But I guess you could say irs.gov is your spot, and then from there you can kind of read about what the truth is, if you will. But certainly, that's the first place to go. We're trying to lead people there in any way. Online, the internet, in terms of using our website before you call, because if you do call the agency, if and when you do get through, and eventually you do, you're just on hold for a while, and we want to try to get folks to get the help they need immediately as opposed to waiting on hold.
Right, and I would surmise that the people that are at the 800 number are not fluent in the law, the statutes, and whether or not, and enforcement, whether or not something is legal or not. So they really can't answer that question. Yeah. So again, the place to go is irs.gov. And I guess you could, what would they use like as a search term once they get to irs.gov?
Well, if you're still referring to the frivolous argument kind of a thing, as you mentioned, so it's the truth about frivolous tax arguments. And that is a PDF document. I think it's around 50 or 60 pages long, and it has all you'd want to know about, argument X, and then what the real interpretation of that is, and then several court cases or whatever to support the view behind it. But so you get the idea. But I mean, if you just went to irs.gov and just wrote down frivolous tax arguments, you'd find a lot there as well. So there's plenty there, and that's where you can really get it and read it in depth. And if you really want to read through all those cases and click on the case itself and read about all the different nuances involved and get in the weeds, you can do that online.
Yeah, and I think what's most important is that what you're putting down is not your opinion of what the law says. you basically spell it out, and then you use court opinions to back up what you're saying. I think that's very important for everyone to know as well.
Yeah, that's what the IRS does, and that's what this pamphlet does. And court cases are important, as you know, right? So yeah, that's a big part of it for sure.
All right, guys. Well, let's take a short break. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we have some more questions for you. So stay with us.
There is a very high likelihood your mortgage contains an extensive error. At Mortgage Fraud Examiners, we know just how costly a missed opportunity can be. For almost 40 years, we have consulted, retained, and referred to by attorneys, lawyers, trial practitioners throughout the nation. Put another way, we are the trusted source for litigation support. A foreclosure is basically an allegation the homeowner breached the contract by failing to make timely payments. The contract is clear. The borrower promised they would make timely payments, and if they didn't, the lender could take the property. The only way to overcome the homeowner's breach is to show the lender breached first. Identify errors that would void the contract. Identify regulatory violations. Identify appraisal fraud and other fraudulent conduct. And the only way to find these wrongs is to thoroughly examine the whole mortgage transaction. This meticulous examination of your mortgage transaction and appraisal can identify legal defects that would make your mortgage unenforceable and entitle you to compensation or even free title to your property. Call us at 844-920-7200. Mortgage Fraud Examiners, that's 844-920-7200. 844-920-7200.
We're back on AM FM 27.4 radio, and we have with us today a special guest from the IRS who's explaining to our listeners what's real and what's not real. Laurie, I know you've got a bunch more questions. What do you got for us?
Well, I always have questions, and so one of the things I looked up, I'm going to actually read off to you. It has to do with criminal activities and violations of the tax law. So this list says deliberately underreporting or omitting income, overstating the amount of deductions, keeping two sets of books, making false entries in books and records, claiming personal expenses as business expenses, claiming false deductions, and hiding or transferring assets or income. Is that fairly common? I mean, I have to sit here and go, it must be fairly common if it's something you can find on the website. How do people think? How do they think they can get away with doing this? How do people think they can get away?
I don't know, but it does keep our criminal investigation folks busy because there's one case after another that I read about or hear about just about every day or every other day, depending on what city you're in, about our criminal folks going out there and taking care of a bad guy or a bad person, if you will. You know what I mean? Doing something they're not supposed to do, like you say, all those things. Fraud in any kind of arena or anything you mentioned there. But, I couldn't tell you the psychology behind that, to be honest. I just think that the best way to go about it is whether you have an opinion in one way, shape, or form about taxes or such, it's something that we all need to take care of, so just take care of your business and move on. I just think of it that way. But I understand a lot of folks have different views and such. At the same time, we have our enforcement folks, our criminal enforcement folks, investigations who keep busy, unfortunately, but that's what they have to do.
And what about things like tax?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Laurie.
Okay. What about people who prepare? Professional preparers of tax. I'm talking about people who professionally prepare tax returns. Are there scams involving them? Because I read a little bit that there are also, and sometimes those people actually try to get the money back. But do you find that preparers, like for companies, are trying to save their clients so much money that maybe they just kind of skip the laws and make promises back? Like, hey, I'm going to be able to get you a better tax. I'm going to get you more money back than, for example, some company.
Yeah, understood. No, return preparer fraud is a big issue because, honestly, and I offer this with a lot of humility, no matter who prepares your tax return, no matter who does that, you're the one responsible for the information on it once you sign it and submit it and send it in. So you want to choose somebody who's looking out in your best interest, who's going to file an honest and accurate return the first time, let alone filing one to begin with, right? So you don't have delays in your refund. But certainly we see a lot of that, and we do have a lot of investigations going on for tax professionals, because when we start seeing a pattern of several hundred or several thousand tax returns, then you kind of can start saying, hey, we need to kind of take a look at things here. So return preparer fraud is a big deal. So no matter who you choose, always remember that once you sign it, you're the one responsible. So you really want to be looking out and finding somebody who's going to prepare a return that's accurate and a reflection of you and your family and your situation. Now, that said, we have a whole lot of literature on IRS.gov about how to choose a preparer, tips to look for, and those things include word of mouth. If you walk into a return preparer's office and they say, hey, I'm going to get you a big refund no matter what, that can be one of those red flags. You want to make sure that you spend some time with this person. It's a pretty intimate relationship when you give somebody all of your financial information to prepare a return for you. You want to maybe avoid those ghost preparers, those folks that put up a shingle, if you will, in March and April, and then are gone, because if they submit a return or you submit a return that is bogus, they'll be gone and you'll be left holding the bag. So there's all kinds of different nuances there, but really the bottom line is you want to be looking out for you and looking out for that person or firm or whoever it is that prepares your return, and you want to review it. You want to take a look at it. Is this accurate? Does it reflect my situation? Because if that happens in the letter from the IRS, it's a letter for the most part, a letter in the mail, is going to come to you if there's a discrepancy.
Mr. Carino, I have one that I'd like you to address, and I don't know how familiar you are with it, but I'm going to give you what basically is the gist of it. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people that are all over these Facebook groups and different groups that believe that they have, and I've heard different figures, anywhere from 600,000 to 100 million in a treasury account, and that their Social Security number is the account number. And what they can do is they can create their own promissory note. We see this all the time dealing with mortgages, where they're told that they can create their own promissory note, pay off their mortgage, and coming from this treasury account that they have. Now, I can understand where maybe somebody buys into some arguments because they don't understand how to read statutory law or don't really understand what court cases say, and they're scammed by a well-spoken guru who's telling them that they don't have to pay taxes because includes means this and that, these types of things. But it strains credulity that anybody would believe that they'd have this amount of money in a treasury account. I haven't seen on your website anything actually addressing that. Are you familiar with that argument?
I am not. That might be a Treasury. So you have Treasury is, IRS is part of Treasury, but you can go to treasury.gov and you might see that. But as you were describing that, I was thinking, man, that just sounds like it's too good to be true, right? I mean, if that sounds like I could just do that, then that's got to raise your antenna as a consumer, and you got to go to yourself, wait a second, I can't believe this until I do more research on it. Then you do the research and find out it's a scam. So that's one of those things, no matter what it is, certainly, step back and go with your common sense before you just decide, hey, I'm going to take advantage of what you described there from Treasury. But off the top, I have not heard of it, but you might try the Treasury website, like I say, is treasury.gov, and see what you can find there on it.
Yeah, maybe we should get somebody from, I was just going to say, maybe we should get somebody from Treasury on as well to address that argument, because I see this all the time as well. I mean, I know that there's groups out there, and if you look at the members on these Facebook groups, you'll see there's 10,000 members in this group. There's 20,000 members in this group, all dealing with that same subject matter. I mean, that people buy into such nonsense like that is just, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, common sense.
Maybe
common
IRS
sense.
IRS should be checking out those Facebook groups to see all those people that are actually on there. It might scare them.
Well, yes, and if you're out in social media broadcasting things that do that, then certainly, like I say, you want to check into those things. If they just those kinds of things, scams, and there's so many nuances of them. They use IRS as a lure, if you will. You just want to be careful, really do.
Any other questions on your list there, Laurie?
Well, one of them it says falsely claiming zero wages or using a false Form 1099. So can you talk a little bit about that, Raphael?
Well, that's just another version of trying to avoid, paying taxes, and people falsify padding deductions on returns or income on claim credits or excessive claims or all those different kinds of things. But if you're doing that, you're doing something to avoid paying what you're supposed to pay. And, we put out right around February, March, a dirty dozen list of the 12 scams to avoid. And they're usually a compilation of what we're seeing the year before in terms of the commonality of them, if that's the right word, the popularity of these scams. And every year, something like that is on there. But, certainly avoidance, shelters, we talked about frivolous tax arguments, falsifying this and overstating and understating that, those kinds of things, they all come together for folks to try to minimize what they pay. And let me say this about that real quick. You should pay no more tax than you owe, not a penny more, not a penny less. And you should legitimately, legally, lower your bill as much as you possibly can with the deductions and credits that are there for you based on the law. But above and beyond that, then you're going into some territory that you may not want to go into. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but was it better then for people to? I mean, I use a tax accountant that I know is reputable. I've used her for a very, very long time, and I know if there was a problem, she would represent me in an audit, for example. I'm thinking most people though try to save a buck, and if they have taxes that are complicated and they try to do it themselves. Not necessarily that they're trying to defraud the IRS, but maybe they don't know the laws, and therefore they're making a lot of errors. And do people end up in trouble that way because they really don't know how it works, but they think they do, and maybe they're just too cheap to go out and hire an accountant who would probably save them more money in the long run anyway?
Well, a couple things. Not necessarily. I'll answer the second part of that first. Not necessarily. If you make an honest mistake or you forget something, you get a letter in the mail and then you take care of business that way. I mean, that's just the way it happens, and that happens all the time. There's not, honest mistakes or mistakes made or forgetfulness and not filing a complete and accurate return. That happens a lot, and then we send out letters by the millions. Reminding folks, hey, we think you owe this, or we have a document here that, document matching 1099, 1098, W-2, those kinds of things. Please, help us understand better, and we take care of business that way. But going back to what you're saying, everybody, not everybody, just about all of us file electronically. If you're a tax professional, chances are you have to file, you have to e-file at the state level and the federal level. About 90% of all returns are now done electronically. And just about all those that are due refunds are using direct deposit, so it's just paperless. And so if you can navigate the software is, no matter what software you choose, is pretty good. I mean, if your situation is super, super complicated, then chances are, you're gonna be paying somebody to do it for you. But there's a good chance we all can do it ourselves using software. You want to get your paperwork together, you want to gather your record keeping and all that and get it organized, and then follow along with the software and what it's asking you and that kind of thing. But, certainly it depends on where you are in terms of your comfort. But, everybody's different, so you get the idea.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of leaving it to someone who actually knows what they're doing rather than trying to do it myself. You know what I'm saying?
I get it. I totally get it. But at the same time, like I say, if you can shop online and navigate a shopping cart and put in your credit card information and do all those things, for the most of us, chances are you can use software and do it yourself. And there's lots of ways to do it for free. There's lots of ways to do it to minimize your cost to prepare the return. There's all kinds of options for free and low cost for those who are lower to moderate income and that kind of thing. But I understand completely what you're saying, and a lot of people tell me the same thing. I would just rather just have somebody else do it. I don't want to deal with it, and that's totally fine.
Right.
Are you familiar with the, and I know I've seen it over the years on your site regarding fake forms. And a lot of these tax protesters and other people that have bought into these arguments file Form 1099 OIDs or miscellaneous and things like that. Do you have any information on that outside of what's on your website?
Information about trying to avoiding that? You mean to not do that, or?
What they do is that they take IRS forms and use them out of context. And this kind of dovetailed on that thing I was telling you about having money in a treasury account where there's these bogus financial instruments, these bonded promissory notes and these other types of things, and they tell their dupes to fill out a 1099 miscellaneous or a 1099 OID. Can you explain that any further, other than what's on your website? Because I know I've seen it on your website over the years.
Honestly, the 1099 OID does ring a bell in terms of it being a scam. But to be quite honest, and for this interview and what we're talking about, I'd have to go back and look at it and read it and understand it again. You know what I mean? Because you can't remember, you can't know everything. But no, I'm aware that now that you say that is something that can be done. We had a form. A scam called a W8BEN, which is a legitimate form that scammers are using a fake form for, and that's part of the nuances of the phishing scam we'll see, where the fraud, the bad guy sends out this form, and in its capacity it's bogus, but it is a real form. So they take the form and they bend it, if you will. But that does happen. And like I said, there's so many different nuances and variations and such. But that OID one, honestly, Storm, I would have to put you on hold for a while because I want to read about it before I would talk about it. You know what I mean? Because it's just off the top, I don't have the knowledge.
Yep. All right. Well, guys, wait, hang on, Storm. Let's do a quick. Okay. Wait, let's do a quick commercial break because it's a quarter hour. Let's do a quick commercial break because we have more. I want to talk more about phishing too. So let's go to commercial break and we'll be right back.
Consumers, do you have bad credit? Can't purchase a house or car? Paying too much in interest on your credit cards and loans? Scammed by credit repair companies? There is hope. You can get back on track and do it the right way. Call Credit Education Consultants today at 813-500-6064. That's 813-500-6064. Or go to crediteducationconsultants.com now and get the help you need. Don't delay. Call today. Mortgage reps and realtor inquiries are also welcomed.
And we're back. And we've got Rafael Tulino from the IRS and Storm Bradford, my co-host, and we were talking about, the phishing scams. So I know people can receive mail, correct, that looks like it's from the IRS, and it can look so real. How can people distinguish it? Because, especially with elderly people, they're not really online. They're not necessarily comfortable going to irs.gov. You're going to have to kind of think they're going to be the ones who are making the phone calls because they think computers are bad. But when you get mail that actually looks like it's from the IRS but it's not, what do they do? How do you distinguish?
Well, I haven't seen too many letters that are bogus letters from IRS. But, yeah, that's a tricky one because our normal correspondence with people is a letter in the mail. It's not a random threatening phone call, and it's certainly not an out-of-the-blue email. So if you get a letter from the agency, there should be a phone number on there to call, and you can call that number. But the letter itself is professional, and it says exactly what particular part of your return that the IRS is asking about, and then it has suggested remedies in terms of if you believe this is true, send this in. If you want to appeal, you have every right to appeal. If IRS assesses something to you in terms of a tax owed, you have every right to appeal it and say, no, IRS, you are wrong, and I am right, and here's why. But the letter in the mail thing, they are a little more few and far between, if at all, that I've heard. It's more the bogus email and the bogus phone call.
Yeah.
The letter in the mail, if you feel is bogus and you don't want to respond to, you can always pick up the phone and call the IRS, and then you know for sure, hey, yeah, we did send you this letter or not. But I hear way more, if not everything else, related to phishing and the phone scams.
Yeah, the emails. I've had lots of people calling me up going, oh, my God, I just got this phone call from the IRS and I'm going to get arrested. And so there's that fear from people who don't know. And, of course, you can see everything it's on, that people put it all over Facebook, but it's like a game of telephone. Somehow it changes by the time it gets to the last person.
Yeah, the bad guys can use technology to their advantage, and they spoof caller ID. They make it seem like they're calling from a call site. There are robocalls, and God, I've heard so many of those from friends and colleagues and reporters and such about robocalls and something. In fact, there's a couple of stories I could tell you, but the funny part of it is the numbers are what the bad guys are going after, and if they can get just a few of the thousands or millions of calls and emails they send out, then obviously they're doing well, and they have, because we've seen that reported to the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. So TIGTA, they're the investigative arm of Treasury that investigates IRS impersonation scams. And unfortunately, in the last 5 years or so, many millions have been lost to the phone scams in particular, let alone phishing. And phishing lends itself to malware being downloaded on your computer and that kind of thing once you click on that link. But like I say, under no circumstance are we calling you out of the blue, demanding immediate tax payment or threatening arrest or threatening a lawsuit. The email, not from us. In fact, we rarely use email at all, to be quite honest. Our normal correspondence is a letter in the mail. And at some point, if you ignore the letter cycle, because we'll send a few of those, you may get a call down the road, but it's more professional. It's not demanding immediate tax payment, that kind of thing. It's different than somebody who's being quick and nasty. You know what I mean?
Right. The IRS is not going to show up at your door, in other words.
Well, that's not necessarily true. There are revenue officers that are doing their job, and they'll knock on doors. If there's a case they have, and we were trying to reach you for months and months and months, that does happen. And there are ways to know if it's really the IRS knocking on your door. But chances are you've ignored every piece of correspondence we've been trying to send you in order to take care of an obligation. So we have no other choice but to reach out. But we certainly aren't going to arrest you on the spot. That doesn't happen unless it's a criminal investigation that's something, i.e. a raid or some parallel investigation with other agencies. But no, nobody is. It's letters in the mail. That's what it is. It's
just amazing to me that people actually try to do all the stuff that we're talking about. It just sounds so stupid. But I guess they figure they can outsmart the system, is what it sounds like. One of the other things I want to talk about was the misuse of trust, where transferring wealth from like one person to another without incurring taxes. How often do you come across things like that?
You mean trust noncompliance in terms of trust, like an actual trust? Oh, I would imagine we do. That's complex stuff. When you're talking about trust law and all those kinds of things, I would imagine we come across it. Off the top, I don't know. But usually when you're dealing with a trust, or I do a radio show when somebody calls and wants to ask a question about a trust or a will or probate or transfer of wealth and all those things, I know some of that stuff. I can tell you where to find the information, but it usually lends itself to more complexities that I want to discuss off the top. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you get the idea, but trust and trusts. I'm talking about not trust you and me. I have to trust you, but the way that's set up is pretty complex. Right. So you definitely want to go to somebody and work with somebody who knows the ins and outs of that. That's a kind of a different level, if you will, of taxes and such.
Mr. Trolino,
Gotcha.
would you be kind enough to make our listeners aware of your radio show and how to call in?
Would I? I don't know. I'm saying when I'm. No. I'm so sorry. When I'm a guest on a show, like if I'm doing a radio show. No. I don't have. No. As part of that, if I'm doing this show right now, and you had a caller that called in and asked that question, I'd give that answer. But through the years, I've done many live radio shows where I'm the interviewee, if you will, and the answers I provide, usually if I don't know them, I'll tell you I don't know. But I'll certainly try to give you a reference or a resource to get an answer. But certainly, like I say, when you talk about bankruptcies and insolvencies and those complex kind of things, I tend to refer folks to a professional, because those are it's really important because it's complex and you want to do it right. You know what I mean?
It's abundantly clear is that there are so many scams that the normal person can't even commit them all to memory in order to be able to speak about them intelligently. And there's a lot of things that are scams that I know that aren't even on your website. It's tough to try to keep up with all this stuff.
Yeah, it is. And like I say, it's common sense. If it's too good to be true, you get the idea. But yeah, I know, man, it's just there's just so many folks out there looking to try to separate you from your good name or your money, and you want to be careful. I mean, one of the things you can always say is a legitimate business or company is not going to call you out of the blue asking for personal intrusive information, that kind of thing, because it's not how most business is done. So that kind of a common sense thing is really important, because you're the best defense for anything, you and me and everybody else, and taking care and being careful with your information.
And that's why we created this show, is because in our minds, educating the public is the best way to stop these scams, because what ends up happening is a lot of people buy into this stuff and they become what I call useful idiots, and they basically parrot and propagate the nonsense, and then so it's almost like multi-level marketing. It starts off with a couple people, and then all of a sudden it's thousands that are all basically parroting the same nonsense, where it just gets out of control. And we believe that the best way to stop this is to educate people before it actually happens.
Perfect. In that case, I'm glad I was able to sit and talk with you guys and help folks understand the real deal.
Well, you're the real deal. We're glad that you came on. We had Mr. Sanford last time. He was a wealth of knowledge as well. It's so helpful to have people that come on that are knowledgeable, that can speak to these problems that are out there, so our listeners can at least be able to listen to the nonsense and then be able to listen to the truth. And then if they go with the nonsense, they're putting themselves in jeopardy.
Exactly. So keep your antenna up and be careful, and just use common sense out there. Remember the old Hill Street Blues show? Remember the guy?
Yeah.
I was a little younger at the time. I was in my high school years, but the guy would say, "Hey, be careful out there." Remember, you say, "Well, that's kind of the same thing. You want to go here." You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Laurie, any last questions?
No, I think we pretty much covered it all. So hopefully our listeners enjoyed the show, because, like we said, we're separating out the reality from the scams, and you got to stop believing the scams and look at reality, or it's going to come and bite you in the butt.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, Rafael Polino, thank you very much for joining us today. Storm, great show. Any other last comments, Storm?
No, I just really appreciate Mr. Polino coming on, because he, again, clarified a lot of things that I know our listeners, they believe one way. Hopefully we've educated some of them to come from the dark side and come over and do what's right.
All right.
Yeah.
We want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today on Fraudsters Radio. Join us again next Monday from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time live. And remember, we do want to hear your stories. You can contact us through the Fraudsters Radio Facebook page. See you next week.
You too, Laurie.
All right. Thank you all.
Bye, guys.
Have your house payments skyrocketed under an adjustable rate mortgage? Have you been laid off or had your hours cut? Are balloon payments coming due? You need help from mortgage fraud examiners. To stop the housing crisis, Congress and the White House are pinning their hopes on homeowners renegotiating their mortgages. The trouble is, the banks are saying no 80% of the time. Mortgage fraud examiners can help you get the leverage you need to turn things around. They estimate that up to 85% of all mortgages are legally deficient. Mortgage fraud examiners can perform a mortgage transaction analysis and an appraisal to find legal deficits in your mortgage. It's like CSI for your home loan. Banks and lenders suddenly start cooperating when faced with a lawsuit for violating lending laws or appraisal fraud. Find out how mortgage fraud examiners can help you. Visit Mortgage Fraud Examiners. Call 844-920-7200. That's 844-920-7200.